So is it weird that the release of a new Purge movie is actually a genuine sign of things getting back to normal and wanting to go back out and, do stuff?
English! Speak!
Does this translate?
Well, I'm choosing to be happy about it either way. Anyway, yeah, looks like things are finally coming back open here in these United States now that we've voted out one virus and are rapidly vaccinating our way through another one, and I, for one, sincerely can't wait to have to find literally any other segue into or out of any other topic after this. Remember when living through the end of the world was just a general feeling of being pissed off at the 21st century being a huge disappointment you gestured vaguely at instead of a literal statement? That was nice. But yeah, I won't lie, I'm psyched as all hell to have something resembling a summer and the ability to do things like interact with friends, help strangers, just people outside my immediate family again. Not that there's anything wrong with my local immediate family. It's just been a year, even as we all must be considerate that bringing a pandemic increasingly under control doesn't mean it's gone away or that you can stop taking every single precaution to be sure it never happens again. In fact, I prefer to think of the Trump era and COVID as basically serendipitous metaphors for each other. Both of these diseases still exist, and even if they're out of power, we need to be vigilant, continue fighting them, and do everything possible to make sure they never get back into power, and in fact continue to lose power until they're effectively a non-entity in everyone else's life. Ahem. One curious feature of the presumptive post-pandemic moment is a sudden burst of think pieces, in general is this a thing clickbait sentiments, about so-called unmasking anxiety, the supposed notion that people who committed to responsible social distancing and sanitary measures during COVID vis-a-vis staying mainly at home, masking outdoors, not being a fucking asshole about their landscaping or haircuts or whatever, now feeling apprehensive about what speed and when they will or should feel comfortable easing themselves back out now that even highly cautious states have begun removing outright mandates and greater flexibility has returned to many person-to-person service businesses. Now, conceptually, I feel like the idea of this makes a certain amount of sense. I don't find myself suffering from it particularly strongly, but I think I get it, and I'm moreover bringing it up here because it does have a kind of extra dimension within the subset of so-called nerd culture that's my specific wheelhouse on this show that we're going to circle back to, but I do feel the need to say up front, yeah, I get what the mindset would be here, even if I feel like this is a fake Twitter guy principle and observable effect outside its original ecosystem. The adage that the social media platform is 90% imagining a guy, tricking yourself into believing that guy exists, and then getting mad about it. The germ of the idea in this case is that as the pandemic situation went on during the last year of the Trump presidency and became politicized as it got more and more obvious that electing a blithering moron to run a country was a huge reason why a bad situation was now spinning disastrously out of control, the need for one ideological side to pretend as though things weren't actually as bad as they seemed, and the willingness of a voting base which, let's face it, will in fact follow you off pretty much any cliff if you airbrush enough Jesus Eagle Blue Lives on it and tell them the elites told them not to jump off, made simple acts of common courtesy like masking, sheltering in place, or not plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan into culture war symbols through which, after a while, you could kind of get a read of whether or not someone was at least a lowest possible bar considerate of other human beings semi-decent person, or a humongous asshole just based on whether and how they observed these basic social protocols. And also, if you were the humongous asshole, you got to be one with even less effort than usual by just existing in spaces where decent people were trying to also exist and performatively making a scene about how proud you were to not mask, not distance, spit on things, cough, knock over retail displays, so we all kind of got something out of it. So well, my very strong suspicion is that unmasking anxiety for reasons other than this was a terrible traumatic experience, especially for people who took it seriously, largely because of all the fucking idiots who didn't take it seriously, which all but certainly caused it to last longer and kill more people, let's not forget, is actually something that's affecting an extremely small number of people. I'd kinda understand it if so, in the sense that there are advantages to just having terrible people openly identify themselves as terrible people up front, so you can just avoid or do something about them from the get-go. The masked versus performatively unmasked thing was at least a way to clarify that quickly for a lot of people, and maybe some feel bad at losing it. You don't necessarily want to go back out into the world and maybe be making small talk with someone only for them to casually drop some, yeah, it's like how Hillary was hiding on Epstein's Island during 9/11, And then you're like, hell, it's one of these. How much time have I wasted here? And also, is it armed right now if I try to get away?
Bist du faschistisch? Nope.
So I get the hypothetical, I just don't know if it's actually a widespread thing, and to anyone for whom this is a thing, like you heard how I described all that and said, yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at, I feel you, but it's also worth keeping in mind that performative martyrdom to call attention to someone else doesn't really work in these situations most of the time, mostly because the people you're trying to shame have no sense of that anyway. So while no one should be giving anyone a hard time if they want to keep masking as long as they feel the need to, there is still a global pandemic after all, and that should be the conversational original focus here, not this. If you're genuinely concerned about, if I'm walking around unmasked now, people might think I'm one of those, I kind of feel like your priorities here might need a little fine-tuning, but also, you can probably relax. I'm just saying.
I want to see.
No, you do not!
So as to the so-called geek culture side of the issue, a different sort of apprehension that I do see a lot more people actually grappling with a real version of is a feeling of discord between their own want to return to normalcy, familiarity, things that they haven't done in a while, and being able to relax versus a sense of not necessarily wanting to be too outwardly celebratory about it, or the rate at which they're easing back in out of compassion toward their friends and loved ones and just, other people who aren't in the same place yet, either because they can't, they haven't been vaccinated, they're still otherwise restricted, or because they're simply taking their own time and remain hypervigilant because this was a trauma. I mean, maybe they survived having COVID themselves, or they had a loved one who didn't make it, and you don't want to be doing a wee back to normal victory dance like a dick in the midst of what's still a not yet victory for them. And obviously, this is something that people are feeling across communities and stratas. I feel it already professionally, even as movie theaters are opening back up and traditional press and critic screenings are resuming. Look, going back to theaters under safe conditions was the first thing I did after my shots were all in order, so damn right am I going back out as soon as possible, ongoing, both professionally and for recreation, and to support the theater industry, and I want to return to something like full normal operations as soon as is humanly possible for the whole industry, and yet I also have to recognize that not everyone in my business feels as ready as I do, and they probably feel pressured to get over it, and that's unfair to them, and thus I feel the internal tug-of-war between not wanting to contribute to that pressure while also being in favor of what I'm in favor of and excited to be starting to get it. It's a balance, and it's not an easy one. And so you can see it in the nerd business more broadly, because so much of that is related to the worlds of popular culture and entertainment, and that requires movie theaters, film and TV production, stores and shops, and the convention scene to be opened up and running at capacity again, for there to be a sustaining circuit of pop culture, production, fandom, community, etc., just as a loop. I mean, I'm part of the YouTube video essay ecosystem, and I'll tell you that continuing to not have a con circuit and letting the YouTube video essay ecosystem dictate the community conversation of fandom is a hugely toxic prospect. You don't want this, you shouldn't want this. But since so much of this is about a sense of community and the need for us to experience human connection within culture beyond just the connection to stuff, you can't fairly do that without making consideration and compassion for those who are going through the process of coming back to the world, those who've been more deeply traumatized by all this or feel they'll need more time to feel okay again, whatever that means to them, feel like they're a problem for doing so. Anyone still masking or not comfortable with X, Y, and Z restriction or mandate being lifted isn't a coward or automatically being unreasonable, and they're not the reason why this or that convention, concert, event, thing you wanted to do or go to or are waiting for didn't happen nor is still delayed. The virus is. And a much bigger version of this that everyone on every side should consider is that some of the most earnest and most shouted down voices on the hey, maybe not so fast end of this is coming from people in varying sectors of the disabled community who for decades have been saying things like a greater embrace of the remote hybrid workplace, acknowledgement and accommodation of the chronically immunocompromised, and greater availability of social practical infrastructure around food, medicine, both essential and non-essential home delivery services should be something society in general should have been promoting, elevating, and even subsidizing, only to see all that and more either be implemented and evolve into place during the quote-unquote lockdown period, finally, because now everyone else needed it too. But now that the point where everyone else doesn't is coming back into view, some of those gains, which these people for whom certain aspects of the lockdown have always been just part of their lives found to be a godsend, are going to start getting dialed back. That shouldn't happen, and we should be listening to those making that point and speak up about it ourselves. If anything, this whole disaster should have taught us that as many things as we liked about normal also clearly wasn't working, and we can't go back instead of going better. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.